Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest Pro Soccer Talk. I'm your host, Joe Prince Wright, over here in England. Delighted to say that I'm joined by Nick Mendola in Buffalo, New York, and Andy Edwards in Kansas City. Lads, the Premier League just is the gift that keeps on giving over the opening months of the season. Another great week, a lot of storylines, a lot of people changing places at the top of the table. We had 4 different teams over the last weekend who led the Premier League at one point. Nick, what did you enjoy? What did you think of the action before the international break?
Man, did I love the first half of Man City Liverpool, and do I blame your English reign for the second half? So that's my main issue. I was so geared up for a great 45 minutes, and then I got to see the ball squirting around for the second half. So it's all on you, England.
Yeah, the English reign can be blamed for a lot of things, but yeah, it was a bit of a damp squib in the second half, but the first half was probably the best 45 minutes we've seen in the Premier League since those two turned it on. I think it was in January 2019 when Man City had that big 2-1 win against Liverpool. So very enjoyable, high level from a tactical point of view. And I love what Liverpool did with the 4-2-4 to completely flummox Pep Guardiola and kind of play him at his own game, right? He's the master of switching up formations and doing something a bit different in these big games. So Klopp out Guardiola. Andy, what about you? What did you enjoy, mate?
I'm just loving the tussle at the top. You mentioned the fact that the 4 teams held the top spot down at one point or another this weekend. It's a couple of teams you might not expect, Leicester City, and I don't know, the other one escapes me. Joe, you help me out here?
No, wow, you tell me. I mean, Southampton are many people's favorite second team now, I would say.
Oh, okay. So Southampton top of the Premier League for the first time. I mean, it's cool to see a couple of, I guess 3 really, because Tottenham there as well. You wouldn't have expected that before the season. So
Yeah.
we're getting a lot of teams in on the action, at least early in the season, before somebody maybe pulls away. But the fact we've got, I'm looking at it now, 6 teams with just at or just slightly under 2 points per game through the first 2 months of the season. There's a lot of quality in the league this year, and it's a little bit more evenly distributed, I think, than it has been in years past.
I just want to point out Southampton, the first time in their history they're the top of the Premier League table, was only for a day and a half, but the last time that happened was September 1988 when they were first in the English top flight. So it was a long time coming. Southampton fans aren't trying to get ahead of themselves, but it's definitely, like you said, Andy, really interesting to see Leicester, even Wolves, Everton are still up there. There's a lot of different teams early in the season, and some of the big boys are languishing in the mid-table, but you know, there's some games in hand, Man City and Man United, so they're going to start creeping back up the table. But yeah, plenty to keep us intrigued over the opening few weeks here of the season. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on our big topic to start with, and that's 3 things we've learned so far in the Premier League season. Head over to ProSoccerTalk and NBCSports.com because we published 10 things we learned over the last weekend, but on each Premier League game, we have 3 things we learned. So Nick, Andy, and I share our thoughts and analysis on some of the things that happened during the game and some of the themes developing here. But I'm going to kick this off with by tackling the elephant in the room, shall we say. VAR, handball, the whole situation is still so confusing. I thought we'd be in a much better place now, lads, than we are. Yes, it's still early in the season. The IFAB rules with the handball situation, it's still, you know, it's different to last season. So now we're seeing these penalty kicks given against Joe Gomez in Man City, Liverpool, and Max Kilman in Wolves, Leicester, which defenders for no fault of their own are just automatically expecting penalty kicks now. They're running back towards their own goal. The ball was being struck towards their arm. There's no intent whatsoever, but it's hit their hand. And to me, it's in a natural position. I know we spoke a lot before about the silhouette and is the arm raised and is it stretched? Technically, it is in some of these situations, but I don't know what defenders, what else they can do because it's natural. They can't run around with their hands behind their backs because they're going to fall over. They're going to fall flat on their backside. So it's just not logical to expect them to do that. And so that's the handball situation, penalty kicks. And VAR, we had a situation, a big one. Some might say it was game-changing in Man City, Liverpool. Before Liverpool's penalty kick was awarded, Raheem Sterling was clearly fouled. It was missed. The ball didn't go out of play, and then it went up the left flank. Sadio Mane cut inside and won a penalty kick. And to me, that's another situation where if you have VAR, you should use it to call that back. It wasn't. It was deemed not, to be a a clear and obvious error, but anybody could see that Sterling was punished for staying on his feet. So to me, I'm going to chuck it out there before you guys share the 3 things you've learned so far this season. But my expectations of VAR and the handball rule is slightly diminished. Because I know we don't want it to be perfect. It cannot just be perfect. But I don't know what we want it to be anymore, because sometimes it does come in. To be fair, there is some consistency with this handball rule, but I'm not quite sure when it's going to be used and when it's not going to be used. And that's the biggest disappointment for me early in the season. Nick, I mean, you got any thoughts on that? And then what have you learned so far this season?
Sure. The only thing I wonder is there a possibility of some other sort of infraction if the handball occurs? Both of those were deep on the box. And I know that revolutionizes the game, but I just don't see how you can legislate it any other way. For the pass back to the keeper, we have that dangerous indirect kick. A penalty kick just seems, it's a little too house money for a foul, quote unquote, of that play. As for the 3 things and what I learned, I think playmakers get the love, but the bigger forwards might be the ones who determine this race. You pick almost any team, and I can thread this needle on their early season success or failure. If your favorite club's underperforming, I bet on it being center forward or striker play to a certain extent. And Everton was up for a while, right? Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison were pouncing on the spoil of James. Richarlison out for 3 games. They've done nothing. Burnley and Sheffield United are down. Where's Chris Wood? Ryan Brewster hasn't done much. And the cherry on top is Gabriel Jesus coming back for City. 2 goals in 2 games, 3-3 this season. Sterling looks better out wide. Finally, what's the difference between Man United in the Europa League and in the Premier League? It's against PSG and RB Leipzig. Marcus Rashford looked like a Ballon d'Or winner. So for me, let's look back, and you can even point to Harry Kane. The big boys are going to do work this year, and that's been the difference for me.
Andy, what have you learned so far?
Yeah, I'll take that, Nick, and I'll kind of build on it just a little bit more and talking about some of the teams down at the bottom of the table. And you know, I tweeted it to you, I think on Saturday or Sunday, what the expected goals tables were telling us about a team that wears black and white from the Northeast there in England. It's not great times for Newcastle at the moment. Bottom of the league in terms of expected goals for, and bottom of the league in terms of expected goals allowed as well. So both ends of the field not really getting it done. But, and here's maybe what should be a little bit of a heartening point for some Newcastle fans or fans of a number of different teams. They're not the only one that are struggling on both ends of the field. There's 4 teams right now: West Brom, Sheffield United, Crystal Palace, and Burnley, just outside, all within the bottom 6 in both of those metrics. So, you know, while the power is kind of being spread out at the top of the table, the futility is being kind of consolidated between 4 or 5 or 6 teams. And so I think we're getting a pretty clear picture, even on a team like Palace, who are overperforming a little bit and kind of sitting mid-table. There's definitely some regression due for that team, and they've gotten away with it a few times this season. And so they're probably going to fall back down into that group. It's becoming pretty clear to me who's going to be kind of in that relegation battle this season once the season, you know, restarts and we get deeper into it. So just be on the lookout for that, because those teams are offering very little on either end of the field, and 3 of them have to go. And based on what we've seen so far, it's not going to be a huge loss for anybody other than, you know, fans of those teams.
There you go. We've learned a lot so far in the Premier League season. Can't quite believe it's only been 8 match weeks. It's with everything else going on, the Champions League, Europa League, it's so much action crammed in. But as you said, Andy, we're starting to see the table settle down now. At the top, of course, there's a lot of contenders. A lot of the big boys have slipped up early in the season. But at the bottom there, those 5 or 6 teams at the bottom have been cut adrift already. And even a team like Leeds United, who had a few stumbles early on, lost Calvin Phillips, maybe they will get dragged into the relegation battle, which you didn't quite expect, considering everything that was so great about Marcelo Bielsa's side early in the season. So, yeah, a lot of good things to learn about the Premier League over the last week. And head over to ProSoccerTalk and NBCSports.com, where we're covered with all the latest news and analysis from the Premier League. Gents, focusing now on the international break. Premier League action is done for a little while. The US national team are in action against Wales and, of course, Panama in Austria, and 2 friendly games. It's the first time a lot of these guys are playing in 2020 due to the pandemic. Most of the players are European-based. And this is a really exciting opportunity to see the players that could be playing for the US at the Olympics next summer in Tokyo. Greg Berhalter, the US coach, has and a very young team. 21 years and 300 days is the average age of this squad. So many teenagers, so many players. I believe it's 10 players who are looking for their first US national team cap. And he said 19 of this squad is eligible to play at the Olympics. So just a reminder, the Olympics, you have to be born on or after the 1st of January 1997. So it's actually been extended by a year due to the Olympics being pushed back a year due to the pandemic. So it's an under 24 tournament now instead of an under 23 tournament. And you can have a maximum of 3 overage players. So I'm looking at these players this week, and I really want to see who's going to take their chance, because there's no doubt that there's 7 or 8 guys here who wouldn't usually be on this US national team roster, but they've been fast-tracked due to the fact that they are in Europe playing for some big teams, either off the bench or for their reserve squads. I'm looking, Nick, like, who are the top picks here for the US Olympic team? But let's not forget, they have to qualify first. We're maybe getting ahead of ourselves slightly, but it looks like, they could have a pretty good run at qualifying, which we think is going to be around March in 2021. That hasn't been confirmed yet. But which players do you think are going to elevate themselves towards this Olympic side?
Well, when it started, it was about watching the center back play. We've covered that a lot when we talk about the United States men's national team and wanting to see Chris Richards. I thought we'd see Cameron Carter-Vickers, who is still just 22. We are not. But as soon as Josh Sargent wasn't released by Werder Bremen, my thought was, well, what are they going to do at center forward? And when we were on the conference call yesterday with Greg Berhalter, he pointed that out. He basically said, whether it's Tim Weah or Sebastian Soto, Conrad de la Fuente playing with a false 9, this is an opportunity those guys weren't going to have, at least against Wales. It was going to be Josh Sargent's position to lose. And we look back at the guys who were left behind, so to speak. Josie Altidore is getting quite older, hasn't been healthy in ages. So I'm going to be looking at the goal scorers here. I think this is a massive opportunity for them. And if you read between the lines, Greg Berhalter essentially said, we like a lot of our MLS guys, and not even essentially, literally said, don't forget about our veterans. This is on the young players to prove they should keep the guys who aren't here out. So lots to watch, and some of these guys are going to be one and done.
Andy, I mean, we have to remember as well that the top US players who are eligible for this Olympic team, Pulisic, Gio Reyna, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, it's difficult to see them actually being released for this tournament, given the fact that teams in Europe are reluctant to let some of their best players go at a very crucial part at the start of the season. So with that in mind, what do you expect? Do you expect to see some of the bigger players maybe making a push and saying, I want to represent the US at the Olympics? Because obviously for a long, long time now, Team USA hasn't been there from a men's soccer perspective.
Yeah, I would think that given the situation of this year and just how the seasons are going to work out from this season to next season and the calendar and everything, and having it condensed this time around. And by the way, who also knows what's going to happen over the next 6 to 8 months between the point where we think that we're going to be, putting this team together for a potential Olympics run. So the season could change again. I would guess that probably under some heavy advisement from their clubs and maybe even some personal representatives, a lot of these players will probably look at it and say, it would be great to play in the Olympics, but I'm going to have an opportunity in the future as an overage player that I could potentially kind of tick that box off the list down the road. And maybe this just isn't the best time. And so it opens the door a little bit more for some of those other players. And one name that I'm very excited to see, and he's not in this team because he plays in MLS, and he's also currently recovering from a fairly lengthy injury at the moment, but it's Paxton Pomykal, a central midfielder, a playmaker, the type of player that the U.S. has not had in a long, long time. Pretty good going both ways, but really, really good, operating as almost a true number 10. And that's the point there is Gio Reyna, Christian Pulisic, very, very solid players, not true number 10s, not true playmakers from the midfield. They will get you goals. Pomykal will create the goals for everyone else. And so I think if he can kind of, one, obviously get back from his injury and get himself healthy and into that Olympic team mix, then he might just end up being the star, like the star of that entire team. And at that point, we'll be fast tracking him towards the 2022 World Cup team.
Absolutely. And of course, there's a lot of these players now, they played together at tournaments throughout the youth national team setup. A lot of these players who we'll see against Wales and Panama played at the U20 World Cups, had some success in the youth team ranks. So that to me is exciting as well. These players have all kind of come through at the same time. A lot of them now have been pushed, okay, due to circumstances that we all know about, into the national team set up together. But that should probably help the likes of Dest, De La Fuente, Richards kind of settle in and look around and see players around them that they know what they can expect from.
Yeah, and can we also give Greg Berhalter a little bit of credit as well, because he has been very thorough with how he has gone through eligible players that either are in the player pool or could potentially be in the player pool, and that's something that wasn't happening for a while. Just the kind of breakdown in communication between the technical staff at U.S. Soccer and players all over the world, the relationships that they were maintaining or not maintaining in some instances with these players, bringing in 2 or 3 players that, all due respect, a lot of people had never heard of before they popped up on the roster last week, is a pretty good indicator, I would think, that Berhalter and his staff are scouring and scouting and seeing and maintaining every single relationship that they need to continue to build this player pool out.
And one point I want to make is that with the schedule being changed to 2021, the tournament in Tokyo is actually in late July, early August. If the US did make it to the final and made it at all, it is, maybe in previous Olympic years, it's been difficult. It's been later on, September, that kind of time where this tournament's taking place. So that could actually work in the favor for a lot of these US players that, hey, like if I'm Pulisic, I'm speaking to Frank Lampard and saying, look, I'll be back right at the end of preseason, but I really want to do this. I have a huge connection, obviously, with the national team, and this is a huge deal. And I feel like a lot of these players, Adams, McKennie, they've come together through the ranks, and this would be something special, especially the fact that they missed out on going to the 2018 World Cup together. So Nick, you got a final point on this roster and what it could look like?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a counterpoint to kind of what Andy said, which makes a heck of a lot of sense, don't forget 2 things. One, we've seen teams angle to grow their mark in the United States market. So that might be a little bit of a, you know what, go ahead. We also saw player power rear its head at the last Olympics. Granted, it was on home soil, but Neymar was like, listen, I want to be there. So we will see right now the desires of those U.S. players. That's a big deal. Also, one last point. It was often at the U20 World Cup, and that was a good team in the friendlies beforehand. They played France. They beat France in the tournament. They tied them in a friendly beforehand. It was often a 4-3-3. That would work well for this midfield. And a top was often Weah, Soto, De La Fuente. They could do that, at least against Panama. So the familiarity is there, and let's credit the program for that for sure.
And one quick drop in, Conrad De La Fuente with Ansu Fati out for months and months and months now.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? There will be minutes off the bench at first, and then he can prove what he can do with that team. He's been just on the periphery of that Barcelona team for the majority of this season. So potentially an opportunity for him to start to make his way at that club and break out.
Another young US player making his way at a European giant. There's so many, isn't there, when you look around now, so many different countries and players move through. I want to finish with saying this would be, in a perfect world, if all the players got released, this would be my starting lineup for the US at the Olympics next summer. All right. So I'm going with Zach Steffen in goal. I think overage player, his situation at Man City, he's probably not going to be needed there. You've got Adunzi who's in this squad. Obviously, he could step in as well in the youth national teams. But I'm going to go Steffen in goal, Dest at right back, Chris Richards at centre back. I'm going to go with Brooks as another overage centre back and it could be Ream, it could be someone else. It's kind of, I think that's an area where you probably need a bit of experience with a lot of these defenders. Anthony Robinson at left back. In central midfield, McKennie and Adams, of course. And again, of course, if they get released. And then the midfield attacking 3 of Pulisic, Reina, and Musa. I mean, I haven't seen Musa in a US national team shirt yet, but from what we've seen with Valencia, he obviously clearly has talent and has produced for the English national youth teams for a long time now. So if he selects the US long term, I'd expect to see him in that squad. And then Josh Sargent up top, I think, again, he's kind of just ahead of Soto and these other, even Weah obviously usually plays out wide, but can play centrally. I think he's the kind of standout candidate. But then you mentioned it before, Nick. I mean, Johansson maybe coming in as an overage player, Brad Kuzan, Will Trapp. There's a way you can flesh out that squad there to give them that experience, but there's a lot of great young talent there. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play, first against Wales and then against Panama in this international break. So, yeah, let's all aboard the Stars and Stripes bandwagon. I'm sure we'll be all focused on winning the World Cup in 2026. But between now and then, there's going to be a lot of fun to be had with these young players. The next big news topic we're going to focus on, lads, is what on earth is going on at Manchester United and Arsenal. These two perennial giants, heavyweights of the Premier League, are struggling. They're in transition, of course. United are kind of piecing it together just when they need to pull out a big result. Solskjaer always seems to be able to deliver it. But Arsenal have had a really poor start to the season, especially from an attacking perspective. And that was never the problem with Arsenal. Mikel Arteta's come in. He's shored things up defensively. But now, Aubameyang looks like a totally different player, looks lost out there. The fluidity's gone. So early in the season, I think fans of both of these teams are really worried about not only, this is meant to be the season they kicked on, right? United turned from top 4 team into a title contender, and Arsenal to be, no longer just looking to sneak in the Europa League or win the FA Cup, but actually get back into the top 4. So Andy Edwards, these giants rebuilding, Arsenal in particular, what do you think about where they're at right now in their sort of rebuild under Arteta?
Yeah, this is not your Grandpa Arson's Arsenal team, is it? I mean, it really is not. And you kind of you hit on it there, Joe. It's the lack of goals. It's the lack of scoring chances. It's the lack of creativity, the lack of fluidity. Anything that you associate with Arsenal over the last 30 years, they're not doing it right now. And it's a very difficult situation to be in. We've seen it play out at the other club we're talking about here, Manchester United, over the last, 7 or 8 years now since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and what the succession plan was going to be there. Were they going to because the identity of the team was the manager, right? And it was Ferguson's way of playing, Wenger's way of playing. That was the identity. So when those two, giant figures leave, is that still the identity of the club, or do they take that with them? And I don't think either of these clubs really had an answer for that question. I don't think they knew what to do. Do we just continue trying to be the same thing, or do we have to kind of not reinvent ourselves, but find who we are under someone else? And they've not been able to do that at Arsenal under Unai Emery, and early days still, to be fair, under Mikel Arteta, but they're painful to watch. They are absolutely painful to watch. And I have no love lost for Arsenal. I'll be the first to admit it. But the entirety of the last 10 years, certainly, and even longer than that, you can enjoy watching them as a neutral. If you could ignore the shirts and the faces and the names on them, you could enjoy watching them. What is the redeeming quality about this Arsenal team right now? Because I'm looking, again, at the expected goals numbers here, 6th from bottom in terms of expected goals for. And as much as they're selling out to defend, they're bottom half in expected goals allowed as well. There's still a level of just being a little naive, I think, from them, while not creating chances and scoring goals at the other end. At least you could always point to that with them, that, well, they didn't have the tough defensive mentality, but they score goals. They're fun to watch. They're neither now.
Nick, who's in the worst spot here, Arsenal or Manchester United?
It's a terrific question. I think technically United is, but Arsenal needs to find something. Just a quick point on them. We saw it in Liverpool kind of gave us a blueprint of trying to lock down Aubameyang as a left wing. And that was in a 4-3-3. We've seen a 3-4-3 try to change that up. We've seen him on the right side to try to change it up. I'd like to see him at center forward. He's had a lot of success there in his career. Maybe see a couple different wingers on there. Willian's obviously very good with service. But United, the reason I think there's a problem there is you might not like the way Arsenal is playing right now, and that's totally understandable. But at least there is a system. It looks like they're building towards a system with the Thomas buy. With United, it seems like the philosophy under Solskjaer is this is Man United. We're a very big club. Sir Alex told us that, and now I tell the guys that, so we should be fine most weeks. And I just I don't think that's going to work for them in the long run. It's a philosophy is great. A philosophy without a system is nothing.
And for Solskjaer, his comments after the win at Everton were quite telling. He came out, slamming the scheduling of when they're playing, and it was almost that Sir Alex siege mentality again, right? It's, I know everyone's talking about my future. I know everyone's talking about Pochettino perhaps coming in to replace me. So I'm going to spin it around and make all of the news about what I've said. And then other managers actually come out and backed him, which we'll talk about later. and it is those little mind games. But Solskjaer, for me, like you said, there's no real philosophy. There was at the start, it was counter-attacking, and this is great. But as soon as teams sit back and they realise that's what United are going to do under Solskjaer, they haven't got an answer. They just try and put star players into the team. That's pretty much how they got into the top 4 last season. It was just they had Bruno Fernandes coming in. It was brilliant, and he clicked with Martial and Greenwood and Rashford, and they were better defensively last season. But it's almost there is no plan at Manchester United. It hasn't been for a long time, and it must be so frustrating for fans of United looking around, even at Arsenal, and saying, well, they at least have a plan. We know where they're going with it. And they have improved defensively, even though they lost 3-0 at home to Villa. Generally, they have improved defensively, but the balance isn't there. But I would hazard a guess that Arsenal will get that balance back. The attacking players will figure it out. They will find out the right, combinations in the attack and in the wide areas, especially. So, yeah, I think we all agree, right, that Man United are in a much worse place long term than Arsenal.
Yeah, but they're both two very, hand-to-mouth living clubs, right? Because they have massive revenues and they tend to spend a lot. I mean, their wage bills alone eat into a lot of that. But at some point, if Arsenal don't finish top 4 this year, that'll make 5 years outside the Champions League. That's a lot of lost revenue for a club the size of Arsenal and that spends the way that they do. United have been in and out, and so they have managed to stay afloat. If they don't get in again, that's always a big hit for them, and it just at some point it's going to affect the level of players that they're able to sign, and then they're going to have to do a rebuild with an actual plan, like a good plan, a plan that's really thorough, and they can make good buys and good signings rather than just the biggest names that they can get.
And I think the one interesting thing this season is that there are a lot of contenders floating in and around the top 6 and the top 4. Leicester City, Wolves, maybe not quite Southampton, but there's other teams who've had a good start to the season who will make it more difficult for them to make up this ground they've lost early in the season, because they have the Champions League, they have the Europa League, their squad is stretched very thin already. There's been key injuries. This season almost is very, very important for the way both of these teams are set up, right, for the next few years. Because, like you said, Andy, if Arsenal now don't take that next step and get into the Champions League, the pressure already starts to build on Arteta. And for United and Solskjaer, it's just a necessity. You have to, with the money that's spent, the money they're losing throughout all of this, they have to be at the very minimum in the Champions League. I mean, maybe the balance in the books doesn't quite tell you that, because they've still gone out and spent a lot of money this summer. But I'd hazard a guess that if Solskjaer and United aren't in a very good position by the time January rolls around, then that's when we'll see Mauricio Pochettino roll up. So, Nick Mendola, any final thoughts on the future for these two teams?
Yeah, just you're going to start to see more and more the players echo the coach, especially as the siege mentality kicks in. And we heard Harry Maguire say that. By the way, he's been quite good. I think I want to point that out again. We talked a little bit last week, but he's been a difference for them. But he talked about them being the biggest club in the world, and that's why people are always talking about them. I wonder how long that can last, though. If the results drop off at some point, it's, yeah, we're the biggest club in the world, and people are always talking about us because we're not that great.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of talk, obviously, transition and the bigger teams trying to figure it out. So a lot of twists and turns ahead, and to see who can actually finish in the top 4. And this season, more than any other season, we're going to see some surprises, right? So it's going to be very, very interesting, lads. The next big news topic I want to talk about is what everyone seems to be talking about. Should the 5 substitution rule come back to the Premier League? It was obviously around for Project Restart due to the crazy circumstances, the amount of time the players had off between the season being suspended and then restarting in June, and then the games being crammed in. It made sense in the summer, but now after 2 votes early in the Premier League season, clubs have voted to not bring the 5 substitute rule back, only have 3 subs. The rest of Europe, La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, in the Champions League and Europa League, you can still have 5 subs. FIFA have relaxed those rules for the entire 2020-21 season. And that's upset Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. But Klopp in particular, I spoke to Klopp after Liverpool's draw away at Man City, and he was absolutely adamant that this is a necessity and there's no advantage to the big boys in the Premier League by having the rule go back from 3 subs back to 5. They were very passionate, both Guardiola and Klopp, and they were echoing a lot of thoughts from players, managers and players and people around these teams that really have been calling for more protection for the players. So here's what Jurgen Klopp had to tell me after Liverpool's draw at Man City. And yeah, you can tell he was not happy with the situation whatsoever.
Look, it's in my understanding, it's a lack of leadership. So you go in a meeting like with all the different teams. The coaches are obviously not involved, and then Richard Masters says, "So we have that point here, 3 or 5 subs. What do you think?" The teams had to be. They have to understand. All the teams have to understand why it's so helpful. It's not an advantage. It's a necessity, 100%. So, and it's in all other countries it happens. So. And now here we make a bit more fun of the competition by having only 3 subs. That's really incredible. So we have to talk again, and that's why I say it's a lack of leadership, because Richard Masters sold it completely wrong, in my understanding. Going there and telling, so what do you think? What do you want? What do you want? Yeah, and then we have this situation. It's the only league, big league, where you have only 3 subs. Surprise.
Yeah, gents. So as you could see, when I spoke with Jurgen Klopp, wasn't happy at all. Of course, Richard Masters, the Premier League chief executive, he was the guy who was focusing a lot of his attention towards saying that essentially the Premier League should just change the rules and there shouldn't be a vote out of the 20 teams, because now you need a 2/3 majority, so that's 14 out of the 20 teams to vote in favour of changing a rule. I think it's been up to towards 11 maybe voted in favour of having 5 subs. That's the closest it's got so far. So it's not too far away, but some of these injuries that are being picked up, as we saw, Trent Alexander-Arnold went down for Liverpool. Luke Shaw is out for Manchester United. A lot of players are going down with these muscular injuries just purely through so many games early in the season. What are your thoughts, Andy? Do you think Klopp has a point here? Do you think there's a chance that the Premier League just enforces this, given the extenuating circumstances of the current situation we're in?
See, I agree with him that it's a necessity. Player safety and just player care as much as anything, and taking care of what are, at the end of the day, massive financial investments for these clubs is a necessity. I disagree that like it is an advantage. It is an advantage for teams that have 5 subs of the quality that a Liverpool or a Manchester City or even Manchester United or Arsenal or Tottenham or the big clubs that have the big money and the big squads, they will have an advantage. And I think we saw that play out a little bit during Project Restart, where you can make 5 subs and affect the game in a much bigger way. My question would be this: the managers that are unhappy about this came into the season knowing what the rules were going to be. They know what the rules are now. So why are they not doing anything differently? Why are they continuing to play the same players twice and 3 times a week? I understand that it's, not preferable to play a backup anytime if you don't have to, but you kind of have to. Otherwise, you're going to then lose players to injuries, and then you're going to have to play that backup for a lot longer than you would for just the one game if you're going to rotate and give a guy a rest. Like Luke Shaw started 7 games in 22 days. What is Ollie doing? Of course he got hurt. Of course that's his job, is to manage the team and keep the play. That is your job. So I don't know, do your job.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out that Tellers did contract COVID-19, so his backup left back in this situation, he couldn't rotate him in and out of the team.
What about the 15 days prior to that, though?
Exactly. So
anytime in there.
Exactly. And so I want to add one point as well. So in Guardiola's comment after Klopp's comment, he came into the press conference on Zoom, we were chatting, and one of the final questions from a journalist was like, okay, you're so unhappy about using 3 subs, Pep, but you actually only used 1 sub today against Liverpool. And his answer was very short and along the lines of, I can do what I want, and then he walked out. So there's some accountability there, like you said, Andy, for managers complaining about it on one hand, but then on the other hand, not really managing the situation. So Nick, before I throw it to you, I want to add by saying that Richard Masters has been speaking to the UK government here, and this topic actually came up from MPs asking Richard Masters about a whole bunch of things, but the 5 sub rule, it's such a big topic here that he was asked about it. And he said that we've already voted twice for this not to happen amongst the 20 member clubs. and he cannot see it changing in the foreseeable future because that's just the overriding will of most of the clubs. So, Nick, should it happen? What are your thoughts? And where do you see this going in the future? Because clearly, like Andy said, there is a concern here for player welfare, isn't there?
There is. I can see it going in any direction, and we've seen it happen here. It sounds funny when you bring that up, that MP thing, but SEC football, right? Like that was a big thing here earlier this year. Here's why I think it can work, and here's an argument for the smaller clubs to think about. They can lesser survive injuries, right? And I realize that it's not super congested, but think of it this way, and I'll go to a Newcastle angle. They lose John Joe Shelby to injury. They have nothing. They cannot currently, and that's their fault, but they cannot currently link their backs to their forwards. And I think if you told, given some of the injury history to some of their stars, including Alan St. Maximin, if you told Steve Bruce, hey, these guys are going to be more healthy, but you're going to have to deal with 10 minutes of Divock Origi and Curtis Jones, I think they'd say yes. So yes, the depth is much better, but I do think there would be benefits for everyone. And there's a reason it's been adapted everywhere else. I would like to see it. It's not the end of the world if we don't. And Andy's absolutely right, by the way. You don't need to see these guys all the time. But I can see a route to it being beneficial to everybody.
And I think the kind of small club, big club argument is the underlying, sort of the main underlying theme here, right? You have a huge chunk of the Premier League, the Newcastles, Aston Villas, Everton, Southampton, Leeds, who aren't in European competition. Their squad isn't being stretched to its limits by playing 3 times in a 7-day period and traveling here, there, and everywhere. And off the back of a short pre-season and hardly any break in the summer. And those teams are like, why would we vote to lessen our chances of causing an upset and getting points against the big boys here? We're voting against ourselves, essentially. So you can understand, I think, their stance, and they're so desperate, especially given the current financial situation, to stay in the Premier League and get to that 40-point marker as soon as they possibly can, a lot of these teams. So I do think there is a little bit there of the bigger clubs. Maybe if you asked Jurgen Klopp and said, hang on a minute, Jurgen, if you're a coach at Southampton or Newcastle, would you still have these same feelings? Would you still have the same opinion? And I don't know if they would, to be perfectly honest. It's kind of almost split 50-50 down the middle. Like we said, 11 teams voted in favour for it. Obviously, that means 9 didn't. We've already had David Moyes come out and said that maybe he would change his mind, and West Ham were one of the teams that were, flip of a coin, trying to figure it out, and they've been hit with injuries. So I think this is a situation that's going to be fluid. Like Nick said, it's got to be a situation where these adjustments come on the fly, depending on how long, obviously the pandemic, we're hoping that by the end of this 2020-21 season, we're in a much different situation, and then players can have a much longer rest, and that is going to probably be the case. But in this next 6-month window between now and May, there are a heck of a lot of games crammed in between international cup competitions, European competitions, domestic leagues, and something's got to give, right? And at the moment, the thing that's giving is the players and their injuries, and they cannot sustain playing at high intensity for this long. So, gents, any final points in this? Andy, I can see you nodding your head and smiling along there.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say the only thing giving is their hamstrings, because it does seem to be hamstrings,
Yes.
again and again and again is kind of the common injury. I guess I would just respond to what you said there. Rest in the summer, European Championship. So I don't know about this is going to continue straight on into August for the start of next season. And then it's the World Cup in November and December of the season coming up. So that's already going to be weird. They're probably going to have to start that season. So this isn't going to go anywhere. And so managers can continue to just complain about it and have an issue with it, or to the point that I made earlier, they can adjust and they can start doing things a little bit differently and get out ahead of this before they're down an entire team due to injuries. That would be my advice. That's what I would do if I was a manager. I would not play the players who I think are going to get hurt. If I continue to play them, I would give them a rest and play some different players.
Yeah, Andy, if in playing FIFA or Football Manager, your players would be tired because the video game says this is tiring, then it's a fair shout that may happen. And Joe, what I'd add is Project Restart. Did we really have any problem once the teams got going with what we were watching and how much longer the games were, anything like that? So it all turned out to just be fine. And there's just, if we're talking about player safety, why not take that extra step?
I think this is going to be something we'll talk about for the rest of the season, gents, and maybe even beyond that. Like Andy said, there's pretty much non-stop action throughout the summer months, building up to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Yeah, it's non-stop football, which is great for neutrals. But if you're a player or a manager right now, there is no end in sight, really, apart from maybe 3 or 4 weeks over the summer of 2021 where you can have some downtime.
And also, when they do get breaks, they go on warm weather training camps and play trying to have both sides of this here is the more that I think about it and the more we talk about it, I'm just kind of annoyed by Klopp's answer to that, because Liverpool will be the first team to go to Barcelona for a week and train hard in the warm weather. If they go out of the League Cup early or something and they have an open date, they're gone. They're in training camp.
Yeah, don't even get me started on the end of season tours to Australia or some of the games that some of the big boys have played over the years, because that defeats the whole argument, as you said, Andy. We all know we want to grow the game across the globe. Sponsors ask for certain things, but in this situation, obviously, if this is what you're arguing for and you want more rest for your players, you don't want to see these big teams jetting off here, there, and everywhere at the first possible opportunity they can do. But they're probably going to do that, aren't they? Anyway, if they do get a window. So an interesting topic, interesting discussion. As we said in the UK here, Richard Masters, the Premier League chief executive, is answering to government about it. That's how big of a deal it is. So 5 substitutions. Are we going to see it come back? Doesn't look likely right now, but I'm sure there'll be a few more Premier League votes on it. So, gents, all that's left for me to say is thanks for joining me for Pro Soccer Talk this week. Thanks to all of you for watching, and head over to Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com for all the latest news, analysis, videos, everything else from the Premier League, Champions League, Europa League, and of course, over the international break, we'll have you covered as well. Cheers, boys. Thanks for the chat.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe. Make sure you subscribe to watch highlights all season long, and always join us every weekend at 7 a.m. on NBCSN for Premier League mornings. Plus, make sure you subscribe to Peacock Premium as well, where you can watch exclusively live 175 games and same-day on-demand replays of all 380 Premier League matches as well.